If you look at a collection of papyri from late antiquity, you may see a series of weird letters somewhere on the page.
These are Charakteres. There are hundreds of them.
In 1914, a French scholar tried to search for a key to the code, a kind of magical Rosetta Stone which would unlock these symbols. We've still not found one, and most scholars have given up on this idea.
In this video, I want to explain the purpose of this ancient script
and trace its evolution from the temple courts of Egypt to the letters of a Roman emperor to a chariot race betting syndicate,
and finally to the reputed sayings of Jesus, who according to one sect recommended Charakteres to his followers.
Hi, I'm Josh and welcome to Bluefawn, an AI-free channel where we look at religious and esoteric history. If you want to immerse yourself more in the world of these videos, my historical fantasy novel is now available on Amazon. Enjoy.
Charakteres first emerged in the Greek magical papyri around the 2nd century CE.
Ancient temples could be busy and chaotic places, but Egypt was a province where magic had long been seen as the responsibility of temple priests. If you wanted a spell done, perhaps to help with a court case or win back a lover, then you went to the temple, found a willing priest, and paid the money.
Some kind of magical ritual would follow, involving writing on papyrus or a tablet, and then breaking, burning, or burying the magical message. Egyptians connected images, words, and text together. Hieroglyphs were inherently magical. They didn't just describe the world, they shaped and changed it as they were being written.
However, by the 2nd century CE, hieroglyphics were no longer taught in Egyptian temples. Greek was the language of government, administration, and magic. Writing spells was suddenly a whole lot easier, and a little less mysterious, even to the illiterate. It seems some temple priests responded to this by getting creative. One of the earlier spells in the Greek magical papyri is written in a cipher code. Letters of the Greek alphabet have been shifted forward. To a client, it would look like gibberish, but there was method to the madness. This kind of mystical writing focused on the relationship between the magical practitioner and the divine forces. The code was a secret between them and the god or spirit they were calling upon.
Later in the same coded fragment, the magician is commanded to write a character, a single letter which will protect him when a divine being reveals its power. The symbol is simply described as of Kronos.
Again, there seems to be some logic to the letters here. The priest may have understood this as a suggestion to use Saturn's zodiac sign, since the two gods were said to be the same. Elsewhere in the same papyri, we have a list of zodiac Charakteres. It seems the correct Charakteres had a magical sympathy, connecting them to a particular divine power.
They could pacify, frighten, or control evil spirits. This example is similar to the cipher. To an educated priest, it is pleasing, but to an illiterate farmer, it is impressively incomprehensible. It might as well be gibberish. People might as well have just made it up. And in fact, that's what some magicians started to do.
Outside the temple walls were a host of semi-literate practitioners of magic, offering cut-price, quicker, and sometimes nastier services. In the triangular relationship of magical practice, between expert, client, and divine power, it was the client-magician dynamic which worried them most. It was how they earned their bread.
It's no coincidence that most of the characters found in the Greek magical papyri appear in books 7 and 36, both of which probably had less to do with the scribes in the temple complex and more to do with the Wild West of magical practice outside its walls.
Egyptian clients expected mystery and ineffability when they went to a magician. You weren't meant to understand it all. Even if you hadn't invented a cipher or studied the zodiac, you could still offer your clients a feeling of bafflement. Instead of writing normal Greek letters, you could get creative, changing lines, adding dots, writing an incomprehensible language of the gods. When asked how to say these strange letters and words, you could simply reply, "They are unutterable in a human tongue. They point to divine mysteries we can only wonder at and struggle to grasp."
Now, it sounds like I'm saying people scribbled any old nonsense, but there was a tradition, a set of rules. It's like the difference between the meaningless scribbles of a toddler and the incomprehensible handwriting of a doctor's note. One of them is still following a system. So how did people write Charakteres?
Well, they generally started with the letters of the Greek alphabet. Then they used one of 7 techniques: turning the letter around, adding dots or circles, adding little curves or small lines, adding lines or letters inside or around the Charakteres, combining 2 letters or more, removing lines from complex letters, and joining letters with a horizontal bar.
Like the amulets and tablets they were written on, Charakteres were probably improvised as part of the ritual. This is why we've discovered over 690 of them so far. A few recur again and again, but we'll come to those later.
The first scholars to study these strange symbols tried to connect them to hieroglyphs. This wasn't a bad idea. Ancient people probably did the same thing. It was one reason they were so popular. But in reality, the vast majority of Charakteres are derived from the Greek alphabet. Only in special cases, usually where the magician is probably especially educated or privileged, do we find a mixture of the two. A rare example of this is the mysterious Prognosticon, a presumed diviner's amulet from a magical kit found in Pergamon. Here, hieroglyphs and odd symbols are mixed together, perhaps representing some kind of astrological chart. But this mysterious object remains an outlier compared to the popular, semi-improvised symbols of the Greek magical papyri. The practice of writing Charakteres exploded across the Mediterranean world in the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE.
It tapped into the hunger for ancient hieroglyphs, drawing on the prestige of Egyptian religion without ever being constrained by it. It gave the magicians freedom to improvise, as well as a kind of unassailable authority which their clients lapped up.
These symbols were as unrecognizably weird to the ancients as they are to us today. It's one reason I decided to add Charakteres at the beginning of each chapter in my historical fantasy novel. How did I pick them? Like a good Greek magician, I simply went on instinct. Here's an example of a spell using Charakteres. A spell for causing talk while asleep. Take the heart of a hoopoe and place it in myrrh. Write on a strip of papyrus these Charakteres, and roll the heart in the strip of papyrus and place it on her stomach, and ask questions. She will confess everything to you.
In this example, the Charakteres activate the power of the spell. They're combined with another ineffable tool, voces magicae, apparently meaningless combinations of words and sounds, which may have referred to divine beings. These sound sandwiches are a bit like the audible equivalent of Charakteres. Sometimes they include unorthodox noises, popping, clicking, and hissing.
Incomprehensibly divine. But in some places, instead of referring to divine powers, Charakteres took on a character of their own. They became a personified spiritual force. In a grave in Thessaly, a couple were buried with an amulet which invoked the Charakteres themselves to bless their owners and give them success. A cursed tablet from Hebron, Palestina, addresses the Charakteres directly as if they were demons, commanding them to do the magician's bidding. Elsewhere, they remained a kind of improvised cheat code, guaranteeing a spell would work. This is probably the case in Hadrumtum, a town in Tunisia, where a group of magicians all used the same sequence of Charakteres when writing a curse tablets about the chariot races. In this case, the Charakteres were part of a betting syndicate, and possibly sabotage and foul play behind the scenes at the circus. Charakteres were so popular and used in such a diversity of ways that they got kind of a bad reputation. Porphyry, a Neoplatonic philosopher, famously critiqued them in his letter against divination. Some diviners who suffer a mental alienation go into a frenzy when they hear cymbals and drums. Others get worked up from drinking water or breathing in fumes. And some become enthusiastic by standing on Charakteres, like people possessed by spirits. Porphyry's student, Iamblichus, responded by arguing there were good and bad Charakteres. Some people do put Charakteres to bad use, especially amongst the vulgar throng. These Charakteres have no presence of God. Instead, they are disturbed by evil demonic forces. But there is a type which connects with the gods, pure, unwavering, true. The difference is, there are some who don't think and contemplate beforehand, ignoring customs, prayers, and rituals. How could anything good result from this?
It's true, some were nonsense or worse, made up by the confused or tricksters. But real magical letters could be traced back to Egypt and the original language used to address the gods.
This is the reason all these things have lost their power these days, because they are endlessly altered according to the inventiveness and illegality of the Greeks. But the Egyptians, being constant in their tradition, remain faithful to the same words. This is why the gods love them. Such then is our answer to you concerning the so-called inexplicable names, which are in fact full of divine power.
For Iamblichus, there was a science, a tradition, and a history to magical, incomprehensible words and letters. So which were the original powerful Charakteres, and which were the demonic forgeries? Some people thought they knew. Theurgists, kinds of philosopher-magicians focused on encountering divine forces, tried to redeem Charakteres from the betting syndicates and the curse tablets, spinning and whipping gold and sapphire inks wheels, little circles tied with leather which whistled when they turned and were engraved with Charakteres. The theurgists sought to summon the gods.
Another route lay in astrology. If you remember at the beginning of the video, we looked at an early cipher spell where the magician held up some kind of astrological symbol representing Saturn. This system of mapping out the heavens with Charakteres was developed further. Like all aspects of late antique astrology, it could become infinitely complex. To begin, we find a spell commanding us to write the secret names and signs of the zodiac on laurel leaves to use as part of a dream oracle. I call upon you, holy Zezaubio, from the company of the Pleiades to whom you are subordinate. I command you, you great, indestructible, fire-breathing one, who cast the rope of heaven, through which rope all things turn on earth. Many ancient astrologers studied the movement of the divine planetary spheres across the constellations of the zodiac. The position of a planet in relation to these star clusters was used to determine the future.
But as I mentioned, things could always be made more complex. Ancient astrologers imagined a vast empty space between the planets on one side and the zodiac and the stars on the other. These sections of in-between space could also be divided up, named, and eventually personified as deities in their own right.
Between the circle of the universe and that of the zodiac are placed the 36 decans, separating the one circle from the other. The force which works in all events that befall men collectively comes from the decans. For instance, overthrows of kingdoms, revolts of cities, famines, pestilences, overflowings of the sea, earthquakes. And beside this, you must know that there is yet another sort of work that the decans do. They sow upon the earth the seeds of certain forces, some good, others evil, which the many call demons. This is where Charakteres are linked back into the story. In a very short love spell, we find a list of 36 names in Charakteres representing the decans. They are fittingly incomprehensible, a mishmash of Coptic, Demotic, and Greco-Egyptian.
The association of Charakteres with astrology boosted its prestige. In the late Roman Empire, predicting the future from the movements of the heavens was a widely respected occupation. The most famous example of this is probably the tale of the Emperor Caracalla, as told by Dio Cassius. In this story, an agent sent a letter to the emperor with information from an astrologer warning him that his prefect, Macrinus, was going to try to assassinate him. However, the letter was intercepted partway by Macrinus, and when he read it as an oracle promising him imperial power. He immediately launched a coup, took over the empire, and killed the emperor. Astrology was simply part of Roman politics. It should be no surprise then that we find Charakteres being publicly praised by another pagan emperor, Julian. In his letter to the cynic Heraclius, he wrote,
"For nature loves to hide. This is why the ineffable nature of the Charakteres is by nature useful, even if unknown, for it cures not only the souls, but also the bodies, and it brings about the presence of the gods."
Decans weren't just neat ways to divide up the heavens, they were deities in their own right, with power over events on earth. It's possible some of the more popular recurring Charakteres referred to some of these deities.
However, as the Christian worldview seeped into late antique magic, these decans were increasingly associated with angels. Hear me, you who have established the mighty decans and archangels, and beside whom stand the myriad of angels.
In his refutation of a Christian sect known as the Nicenes, the writer Hippolytus refers to one of their hymns in which Jesus descends from heaven promising to reveal the figures of God. But these figures don't refer to pagan idols, rather they are written letters, Charakteres.
By the 4th century, these odd, ineffable symbols had become firmly connected to the angels of God. A magical tablet in Xanthus states, "Holy powers, holy Charakteres, strong and sure, banish all evil spirits." Another in Vincenza, after a long list of Charakteres, simply says, "You angels, protect her."
Although Charakteres rarely had a fixed meaning in late antiquity, they would provide inspiration for later generations of mystics, alchemists and magicians. The angelic connection would play on people's minds and feed into the magical and angelic alphabets which were invented in the early modern period in Europe. But perhaps what Charakteres reveal to us more than anything else is an inherent tension, a desire to both create something which is totally ineffable and cut off from human conception, and which is at the same time profoundly familiar. And we can see this in the way Charakteres evolve. They're always oscillating between something incomprehensible and something you could use to win a chariot race. In one sense, that odd script is a result of that inherent tension within the human psyche. Perhaps that's the best way to understand this.